So welcome to the node.js package maintenance team meeting for 2023, January 19th. Before we get started, is there any announcements that people would like to share? Okay, no announcements this week. Let me just get that in the minutes. I can get my mouse to work here. Okay, so we move on to the issues that were tagged for the agenda. I think the two that we'll probably most likely have active discussion on is the goals for 2023 and creating a doc on how to support ESM and CommonJS when publishing modules. Is there any preference into which of those we dive into first?
I mean, I made a lot of comments on the ESM one, and I have to go in 20 minutes or so. Maybe that one.
Okay, that sounds good. So I think Luke, you'd open that one, right? Do you want to lead the discussion or kick off the discussion?
Which one was that?
A doc, create doc on how to support ESM and CommonJS. Did I misremember that?
Yeah,
I see.
That looks like.
No, I created that one, right?
I mean, I think the main challenge here is that, like, a doc is good when there's a prevailing best practice that's largely uncontroversial. Then it's like, cool, now we can remove all the barriers to people learning what that is and document it well. Problem is that there's almost three schools of thought. One school of thought is let's always use the new shiny thing and abandon the old legacy things. And that school of thought is let's just use native ESM and be done with it. ESM only, right? And another school of thought is we want to make sure that people don't have to, we want to build towards a world where people don't need a build process to develop for the web. And that's not philosophically ESM only, but that definitely includes shipping native ESM in the package always, so that it becomes possible, or they hope it becomes possible to eventually have an app that is 100% composed of native ESM. And then the third school of thought is more mine, which is that bundlers are fine and handle everything if they're properly working. And so it's just a question of how usable do you want your package to be? Like, how widely, how do you want your package to be usable by all of the people out there who might want to use it or not? And in that case, typically the easiest thing is just publish CJS only, and don't even bother with ESM, because the different advantage, there's not really many advantages there. And those three schools of thought lead to very different approaches with packaging. And they, depending on what your priorities are, you lead to a natural conclusion of one of them is the best and one of them is harmful and one of them is fine. And which is very different. So this is me trying to be as diplomatic about all these positions as I can, right? Obviously I'm very biased towards one school of thought, but I'm just not sure what we would put in a document that wouldn't make that would make this problem better instead of keeping it the same or making it worse.
Right. I guess I think the original discussion was around, if people, so if you're in the first camp, ESM only, I'm going to ignore everybody else. Well,
right.
I think that's your choice to make, and there's nothing to really.
And there's
say,
3 to 6 package maintainers that have made that choice. It's an insignificantly small number of maintainers. However, at least one of those maintainers is Cinder Soros, who is responsible for a very large number of packages and users. And so it seems like a larger group than has been done. Cinder's had ESM only packages for years, and you can look at every single one of those ESM only packages and click on the versions tab on the NPM page and see how small a percentage, it might be 10%, but it's a relatively small percentage of users that use the newest major that's ESM only. And the vast majority are stuck on the last non-ESM major.
But I don't think it's useful for us to get into I agree to your point that we're not going to solve what's the best answer.
Okay. Yeah,
But
yeah.
I can see, like, if you're ESM, like, we can't necessarily add anything because you've got a choice, you got your direction.
Right.
If you're a new package author and you say, well, I want to satisfy both, what is the I think the goal was like, well, is there anything we can provide for those people that say, well, here's how you do your best to make both the ESM people
And that's
happy
why I said
and the
there's
CJS
three
people happy.
schools, because
Right,
when you say both, that implies two. And if there were only two, it would be very simple. It would be
right.
just publish CJS. That covers everyone. Nobody should care what the module format of your package is. They just want to be able to import it or require it, and they can do both if it's CJS, right? And I think that would be the best advice to give. But there is that third group of folks that wants to ship native ESM also, for this aspirational goal of not having a build process. And that's very tricky to do right. And it really depends on what the package is doing semantically as to whether it, like, as to what you have to do. And like, because you sometimes you need to have a CJS singleton that your ESM and CJS imports and shares, right? Like there's a lot of caveats, and that's like, I get a lot of folks showing up on some of my packages saying like, why don't you do an ESM build? And like, none of them have ever given me an answer as to why they want one or what value it would add. But like, I think there's a group of people that think that that's what they want, and I don't know how to give them advice on that that's broadly applicable.
Owen has his hand up.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe part of this conversation might help by potentially reframing the first scenario as less shiny thing chasers and maybe
Sure.
more from the perspective of a standard was provided, and maybe for a lot of us developing packages or thinking of an interop story even outside of node.js, that standard satisfies that. And I don't know the history of CommonJS, if it was a standard in the same way that it's been ratified in ECMAScript, but I don't doubt that I don't dispute, I guess, part of where you're coming from, Jordan, that there probably is to some degree some cargo culting, but I don't think that's exclusive to CJS versus ESM in our industry. But I think it would be prudent to acknowledge those who are aspirational, but for reasons that maybe transcend purely my module system versus your module system, and maybe are thinking
right
towards this nice world where not to necessarily cargo cult and things like serverless and edge functions, but even those are coming around to a world where let's adopt things that can be interoperable. Like, just think of how much, like, the kind of Cambrian explosion that the fetch API brought with request response. Like, you could totally rethink like middleware in a system that you don't have to create or invent for yourself anymore, right? So I think if we maintain that perspective, that there's a lot of people now being able to look at things like Dino and Bun, and it's like, I can, write once, run anywhere, trademark, so to speak. I think it would be advantageous for us as a package maintenance group to acknowledge that maybe less at the library, but more of like maybe the meta framework.
At the application level or something.
I think there's like, for instance, one of my scenarios, like, I'm working on a meta framework. It would be weird that you have to write your browser code with one module system and your server side code with another module system, right? For a better developer experience in that context, the interoperability.
Well, yeah, but you can, I'm not talking about authoring, right? For almost a decade, you've been able to author in ESM. And so you could still author both sides in ESM and bundle differently. You can even bundle them both, right? Like, but so that's kind of what I think that there's a lot of wishful thinking in what you're describing, which is that if we could go back in time and have ESM in the beginning, yes, glorious, wonderful. We have a standard module system. We're all doing the same thing. But
no, it's
one cannot ignore the world.
That,
right.
The people that do want to opt in,
that
They just need to
wanting
know there's a stepping stone at least, right?
right, but I'm saying there isn't one. Wanting a world that can that it is fine to want a world that cannot exist, but it is important to accept that it cannot exist because the past exists, right? Like NPM and CJS are never going anywhere, and they are like ESM isn't interoperable with them.
So
ESM can consume it, but you can't require ESM, and therefore ESM just isn't the standard that the folks with those completely valid ideals want it to be. Just because it's a standard, that just means that 20 to 60 people, myself included, in a room agreed on it. It doesn't mean it's good inherently, right? And ESM, like, I can go on a long rant about how it's actually a mistake and should never have shipped an ES6, but like merely the fact, citing the fact that it's a standard doesn't actually make something good.
Okay, I guess I'm just trying to understand, are we...
I think, sorry, can I?
But from the perspective,
go ahead.
I guess what audiences do we want to care about then?
Right.
Because if there are people that, sorry, I'll let you go, Mike. I guess I'm just curious, like, are we trying to draw a line in the sand, or are we just trying to make the world as best for whatever use case you're trying to achieve without the editorializing, I suppose?
Right. Yeah, and it wouldn't be appropriate for us to editorialize. So yeah, go ahead.
I think I wanted to add to like Owen's is like, I think there's a large group of people who see that ESM is the final endpoint. Like, but also understand CGS isn't going away next month, next year, right? Like it's a long-term transition, but it's kind of like they see the endpoint of like one, even if it takes 10 years, and are interested in doing their best to support a transition in that direction, right? And so then it comes down to like, if I'm a module author and I'm shipping things and I see that, I say, okay, well, I want to provide both. But how do I effectively do that? And I think, one of your points of saying, well, that's hard. That's part of the reason there might be some value, right? Like, even if it's just to say it's hard and here are the problems that you might run into, or, like the best way is to publish 2 versions of your module. I don't know what it is, but like, I think there's enough people in that category of thought that it would be worthwhile to have something that says, this is what you want to do. It's up to you. Like, we're not telling you module authors you should do this, but if you want to, here's some experience on how you can support both of them. Because like, I know for like some of the modules we publish, we have enough internal people saying like, hey, we want to use ESM. We want to understand how we can do that, how we can do it effectively and easily too, right? Like,
but at the application level, one can make that choice, and you never should care what the consumers are using, right? It's only when you have consumers that choice makes a difference. And to your point, like, about the transition, maybe I'm skeptical that we'll ever get to that point where ESM takes over, but either way, it's like Python 2 and 3. All the people that broke everyone and jumped onto Python 3 right away, they didn't help Python 3 become the standard any faster. All they did was cause a bunch of people pain and make the ecosystem for Python worse, until it took time enough for all the platforms and tooling to support Python 3, which was inevitable because it was a standard. And I think it's the same thing with ESM here, is by encouraging people or even tacitly endorsing people to cause breakage now, we're not accelerating this ideal ESM world everybody wants. All we're doing is making the journey to it more painful.
But I don't think we're not talking about encouraging breakage. We're talking about supporting both.
Right, but that's my point. If one of both is something that hurts people, then that is not something we should support. And it's and even if we pushed it, it wouldn't make the final world faster. Like, I'm saying that one of these paths is actively harmful to a lot of people. It makes the world less secure objectively, because fewer people get security updates because maintainers don't frequently backport updates to older majors. It causes like breaking changes cause probably the most cost of anything in our entire ecosystem. And these were, this is a breaking change. And like, it's just not a thing that like what I'm saying is that all the viewpoints that are pushing for ESM, the things they want are valid. The world they hope to live in is valid. It's possibly better. I don't even think I would argue that it's better if we could get to that world. I think it is better if we could get there. But like setting fire to the trees as you walk down the path doesn't make the journey any more pleasant. Right. And it doesn't make the path any shorter. You still have to walk the whole path. And so, like, yeah, go ahead.
But so it's basically that if you go only ESM, you're basically, there's no turning back at that point, right? Correct. So it's basically, it's almost like the options are CJS or dual publish.
And then like, I mean, those are the three choices, right? CJS, ESM, or dual. And I'm saying ESM is harmful and dual is harmful ESM if you do it wrong, only. And it's right, ESM only. But dual is hard to do right, and it's harmful if you do it wrong.
Right.
And the benefit of shipping dual is virtually zero. I have never had anyone explain why shipping dual is actually better when you can import CJS only. Mm-hmm. So like, and I've tried that. I had a bunch of packages where I shipped ESM versions of things. It didn't matter. I ended up removing them and replacing them with CJS in a non-major because nobody noticed and nobody cares. And I have tens of millions of downloads a week on these packages. It doesn't matter. Like if it's CJS only, everyone can use it. And like, you know, and I'm sensitive to people who want to author in ESM, go nuts, right? Babel's been around for a while. It's super reliable. It's even better than TypeScript at transpiling TypeScript. Like just use Babel and you're done, right? Like, I mean, it's frustrating because people are making choices based on their aspirations and goals and disregarding the damage it causes now. And it's not accelerating their final world. And I think that this group, I agree, shouldn't editorialize, but I think it would be also harmful for us to pretend that all sides are equally valid, to use some parlance of our times.
Well, yeah, I think I understand your viewpoint, but I don't think that. I think many people would disagree, and I think like.
Sure, but if I'm wrong,
hey, let's just stick our head in the sand.
Then we can just migrate stuff later. If they're wrong, a bunch of damage is caused. So like,
I guess like the way I look at it is people are going to try. There are lots of people who are going to say, I want to do both. And if you make that hard on them, they may just say, fine, I'm just going to do ESM.
Right. And so if we end up with a document that says, here are the three choices you have. Here are the downsides of these choices. Here are the upsides of these choices. If you do CJS only, like here's how to do it. And we talk about exports and whatever. And if you do dual, here's how to do it. And here's the considerations. Like I'm fine with us making that package. And then if we say, if you do ESM only, like we're not going to advise you of that because of all the downsides, but like, you know, we could link to Cinder's gist on it or something. And he has this long thing of how he does it and whatever, like if that's a fine thing to redirect people to, if that's what they want after we've talked about the downsides. But like, I think that's fine because I agree. If we can make the people who are going to do it dual anyway, if we can make it easier for them to do it right or harder for them to do it wrong, that's a win. So I'm not advocating against that.
That's the only thing that this was intended was like, if you've made the choice to do it, to do both,
right?
Here's some help.
But right. I think it's really important that we're very clear and accurate about the pros and cons and trade-offs of dual or CJS only before they get to those instructions, because they're the folks who believe that they know how it works and are confident in their decision. They're going to skip the justifications anyway and just go to the instructions. That's fine. But there's a lot of people who see instructions as recommendations. And, you know, we talk about this in TC39 a lot, which is like, if the spec says something, people follow it, even if the spec isn't requiring them to follow it. And like, it's important that we word things, even in the spec, in such a way that people won't accidentally, you know, take it as an endorsement or a recommendation of a behavior. And like, I think that applies even stronger in Node's documentation because people actually like try to read that.
Yeah, I mean, I would personally try and stay away from the don't do this, do that. It'd be like you've chosen to do both.
Right.
Here's the thing. And still that can include some, here are the gotchas to look out for, right? Like,
right.
You know, if there's things you can do that then make it worse for both cases or one case. Like those are the things that you can easily put in terms of saying, hey, well, you're doing this. One of your challenges is going to be this, right? And
well, and I would even come from even sooner and say, like, so you want to make a package. Here are some of the choices you need to make. Like, pick between the module format you use. Like, do you use type module or not? What are the pros and cons of that? That's important. There's too much. I mean, there's a lot of stuff out there that suggests that you just have to use type module for ESM, and nobody actually does. And there's a lot of downsides that nobody talks about. So like having a document that talks about that would be really useful. And then like after we've gone through all that, then they've made their choice. And at that point, I agree. We don't editorialize about their choice. We just say, if after reading all the ups and pros and cons, this is the choice you want to make, click here to go to the the instructions about it, or like show it in a table,
Yeah, I just come from I think once you've made your choice, here's the guidance is useful, and that should be less controversial than like trying to get agreement on the recommend, because lots of people would say no. Like I know people who say, no, I'm just doing ESM. That's what we should do. We should tear the Band-Aid off, and so that's like a never-ending discussion. And I don't think it's like the Nodes projects. Like, I don't think even among our project collaborators that we're going to get an agreement on whether that's the right thing or wrong thing. But I do think we could get agreement on, you've chosen to do this. Here's how to do it the best way you can, that hopefully avoids whatever pain we can, right? Maybe there's still pain, but even if that's the case, if it helps avoid some of the pain, value added, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I agree that it'll be less controversial, but I recognize that what you said is true, right? That we won't come to consensus on endorsing or discouraging a path, but I still think we should be able to objectively describe the trade-offs of who does this exclude, who does this choice exclude, right? What tools work with this choice, or what tools do not work with this choice, and that's relatively objective.
I think we can. It's just not something I personally would want to take on, if you know what I mean. Whereas the trying to document the best practice is something that I I'm interested in seeing us. Right. Like
I mean that it's just frustrating because the best practice, what is best, depends highly on your evaluation of all those pros and cons and your priorities of those.
Right. And so but I come from if we do that, I don't think we're going to do anything, right? Because we'll never get agreement on that first step. Right. Like we're not going to, I don't think we'll get agreement of people saying, no, you should avoid this or you should avoid that. Or even like, the pluses and minuses, people will have, one person's negative is another person's plus. And, you can end up with quite the.
I mean, we don't have to call it pros and cons. We can call it trade-offs and let people decide which side the trade-off is.
Would it make sense to maybe frame it from the perspective of what is your desired outcome, and in the sense of, for those aspirational folks that maybe are intentionally targeting a more like evergreeny standards compliant code base, because they want this module to run in Node or Dino or Cloudflare, or basically anywhere that should run normal JavaScript. Like they are not using Node specific modules, and everything is kind of just to the spec. So it could be the kind of thing where if your package is very specifically targeted to the Node runtime, then that's where needing to know the hazards of going all ESM kind of locks you out from everything, right? So if your goal is to ship the best Node package to everybody, CJS or something like that, right? Like what's the most compatible for Node versus what's the most compatible for general purpose JavaScript, right? And depending on what type of project or outcome you're looking for, you make the choice
Yeah.
based on that.
No, I like that, because then we could say, like, are you shipping, is this, like, we could check boxes, like, is this this package intended for the browser, for Node, for Deno, for Cloudflare workers? You can just list all the things. And then, like, based on what they check, we say, here are your choices if you want to target
The
that.
browser.
Right. For the browser, you can do CJS and then consumers use bundlers.
Right.
Or you can do dual and consumers use bundlers, or you can do SM only and consumers use bundlers, right? And, like,
It's like a choose your
if
own
they check
adventure.
Deno, you have to use a build tool that spits out native ESM, because they can't, Deno can't consume. Although maybe they can now. I haven't followed up with their NPM support, but either way, I think I like that, because that also, like, asking questions about what their goal is allows us to take the editorializing out and allows us to avoid talking about something that they don't care about.
Right. And in that perspective, if your goal is Node, then your points are extremely valid about just go with CJS. Don't go against the grain, but if you're building the next, super awesome meta framework du jour, then you're probably, and you're gonna want to run everywhere then. But to your point, be like, that doesn't necessarily, and I don't know if it's worth getting into, like, other runtimes might let you use NPM, but then it's just it also kind of, there's a rabbit hole there. But I think taking it from the perspective of, I'm publishing this package for a reason. What's that reason? I'm making an Express plugin, or I'm writing an Edge function, kind of thing. So maybe that's like the least, the most neutral way to kind of approach it. What are people trying to do in the JavaScript ecosystem? And if you're targeting Node, there's probably a happy path, and it's maybe less happy to go generic, but here's the best way to do it. If you do, because it could just be the case where maybe we just, maybe we could distill it down to just CJS if you're Node and ESM if you're everywhere. And, like, and maybe if you're really trying to break the mold, there's like a dual case, and this is like, only break the glass in case of emergency kind of thing,
Yeah, I'm more along the lines of, like, I see people saying ESM is it, and want to avoid the case where there's things that can't run with Node that we want to run with Node. And for which the dual is useful, right? Like, we can say, yeah, it's something, it's not what we had, but, like, unless you take the viewpoint that it's never going to become the thing, right? And even if it doesn't become the thing, there are enough people today who will just choose ESM, I think, or at least I run into enough people who are like, I'm just going to do ESM, and it'd be nice to say, oh, but really it's easy to do both.
I do too, but as soon as the trade-offs are explained, virtually all of them, in my experience, switch back to just CJS for packages. For apps, like, fine, but, like, so I agree. But that's sort of what my concern is. I think that there's a lot of misinformation out there, and everyone just thinks, oh, well, I should just use ESM, but they don't realize that there's a lot of trade-offs that incurs, and they either switch to CJS or they use Babel, and it's, like, pretty trivial at that point. But in my experience, what people most actually care about is writing ESM. They don't actually have any attachment to the output format. And, so, like, they don't care if it's dual or not. They just want to make sure people can use it from ESM and that they're typing ESM. And Babel to CJS checks those boxes. And, like, it's just, people don't know that that's possibly a better choice.
So is there, like, I feel like there's probably clearer paths to a CJS only versus a ESM only, like, because the use cases could be maybe a lot easier to distinguish. And do we think that a dual is as easy to achieve, or is that more trouble than it's worth, and you're probably better
dual
off
is
just
really
steering
easy
it to one camp?
dual's incredibly easy to achieve and to get right if your package isn't stateful, isn't a singleton, doesn't depend on the identity of the exported thing, right? So like, and those are three very big caveats. Most packages don't check those boxes, right? So for most packages, it's fine. You can just like write it in one, duplicate the file, and tweak it to be the other module system, and it works perfectly fine. But if any of those things apply, the only way, like, you have to have something be in CJS as the shared identity, and that thing has to be imported and required by your dual files. And so whether that's an object or a constructor or whatever, like, and if you don't do that, you create a huge hazard, like a hazard that already exists in NPM unless you use peer dependencies properly, but a hazard that's infinitely more likely because it could happen even if the package is just dependent on once in your tree. If one thing imports it and one thing requires it, and then those two things end up sharing, you have like two Reacts in your tree, even though you only have one copy on disk. Whereas usually you need two copies on disk to have two Reacts in your tree, right? And so it's the same hazard, but like much easier to hit it.
Even what you just described, I think would be valuable having written down is like, hey, if you don't check these three boxes, here's a simple way to make it dual support.
Yeah, and I'm totally fine with that.
Like that's like a useful thing to say, hey, because like if that's a smaller subset, then like what percentage don't check those three?
It's probably pretty high, but like, I think
if we got something that covers 80%, that's a win.
I think that's
mind,
fine.
right?
I think it's just I would be really interested to hear for packages that don't check those. I'd be really interested to hear what people believe the advantages to dual to be. And like, it's super easy for packages like that to just transpile back and forth. So like, you could ship all ESM and just suddenly switch to all CJS, and that's not even a breaking change. You could ship all CJS and suddenly change it to ESM, and that's a breaking change. But like, if there becomes a point where native ESM on disk actually matters, like that's a very easy change to make. So like, I don't see any value or benefit to shipping native ESM now. And that's what I've still not heard an actual answer to that other than philosophical. There's a lot of people who are like, well, ESM should have been the only thing, and therefore I'm going to write that. But like, that's a philosophical reason. That's not a technical one. So like, I agree with you that we can just write down what I said, and that's fine. Like that will tell people how to do it, and it will at least make them aware that there's foot guns if they check those boxes, right? But like, almost all those people should probably just be writing CJS unless they have a technical reason not to.
But that's like you said, if it's philosophical, we're not winning that. And they may choose to just do ESM, whereas if there's an easy, I can do both. Yeah, I'll do both.
No, right? I agree. I think it's valuable that folks who are stuck on a philosophical decision are at least they have informed consent. They at least are aware of the downsides of their choice or the costs of their choice. And if they are and they still choose it, of course, we're not going to win that argument. Like, we're not in the job, we're not in a position where it's appropriate to tell people what they can.
I could easily see something that says, hey, there's lots of divergent views on what the right thing to do is. Here's a link to something that describes, a couple links. Go read these.
Yeah.
Once you made your choice, here's some useful info.
Right, exactly.
Is there any way to leverage the power of the Node Foundation to maybe do like a survey? I'm thinking like it's almost too late to piggyback off the State of JS survey, but almost felt like if there's like a section on like module systems and stuff, if there was a way to get some insight to Jordan's point, like how do people actually see these things? Why do people want these things? Who wants them?
The State of JS survey is so like demographically skewed that I don't even know if any of its results are valid. That like, I would love to have a survey opportunity to have,
right. Because if you get survey all the meta framework authors, you know exactly what you're getting. Well, that's what I'm thinking. Maybe the Node Foundation has a little bit more geographic reach, or maybe just a wider swath of developers at different parts of the supply chain. But just, even just for the sake of knowing what the community perception around these things are, could maybe give us an idea of, I mean, I know we're not going to editorialize, but, like
I like what Michael said too, right? There's nothing wrong with linking to someone else editorializing.
Right.
It's as long as it's very clear, it's a different site, and that's not, and that author is not speaking as the package maintenance working group, right? That's fine.
And we pull in ones that have both sides, right? And
yes, exactly. As long as all
they can make their
thought
points
are represented. Yeah,
right, exactly. As long as you cover all the schools of thoughts, it's like hey, whether you want to do this or not, here's where you can go decide, and here's all the info. But then, because I think like if you said, oh yeah, it's really simple, having that simple thing and saying, okay, check these 3 things. Are you not in these 3 things? Great. Okay, now.
Right. Yeah, that sounds good. So it sounds like a rough plan then, just to recap, is we're going to some combination of listing trade-offs or linking to people who talk about them, the choices for the schools of thought.
The linking part, I think, is good.
And then linking is definitely good. And then like, if we can come up with a way to say, to non-controversially explain some of the trade-offs, then great. And if not, we can let the links do that. And then we say, if you've chosen CJS only, if you've chosen Dual, if you've chosen ESM only, and we can talk about the things we talked about, like how you do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I mean, it sounds like you could pretty easily write down, if you're going to do Dual and you don't check these boxes, would you be willing to write that? Because I think that would just like throw that into the issue, or
give me a skeleton and I'll fill in a paragraph or 2. That's totally fine.
Okay.
I know my personal weakness is I won't start the document, but I'm happy to fill it in.
Sure, I can open like a Google Doc and link it to the issue and say like, hey, okay, sounds good.
Cool. All right, and I got to go anyway. So
okay, talk to you later.
Next time.
Bye.
Hello.
Hi.
So we're down. I think the other thing was goals for 2023, although I think maybe we want a bigger group to do that. Unless you had some strong or like some specific ideas already that we can chat about, or
I mean,
there's some discussion in the issue already.
Yeah,
I see that this is what I was thinking of. Luke had commented that some sort of support for solution for dual CGS CSM here, right? Which is why I thought he was jumping into the other one, but right.
To be the main one, I don't know if it's necessary. Well, I guess it does tie into the previous conversation, is the acknowledgement of competing node runtimes, and that if anything, one of the things that ESM does provide value for is that interop story. Is even one thing I've been realizing as I've kind of like surveyed the community is like how you build can be different than how you deploy. Like your GitHub action might be Node because you're running Mocha and you've got Cypress and all that stuff, but the output might be a edge function that goes to Cloudflare, right? So so I guess just wondering if maybe we don't need an opinion, or I don't know if this is more of like a technical steering committee, is, how does Node continue? I don't think it's going away anywhere, obviously, but I'm wondering if the emergence of the additional runtimes makes it a good opportunity for Node to, be part of this like universal JavaScript story, similar in the way, like, because one of the things I've gone through is like realizing like, I guess I don't really need path.xname. I could just like split a string and pop it off, but I really like Node for the development environment because, like I said, you got your Mochas, you get all your development tool, your maintenance tools are probably like all Node, but like your runtime is something else, you know. And like, is there that
I think there's already
story.
like, if you're interested in those
The winner
conversations,
CG, right?
yeah, I think that's the right place for that
Yeah.
because like, and there's representatives from Node there, and
Right.
I think anybody who's there could propose something that Node should do.
Mm-hmm.
I just haven't seen any, and like try and get consensus that, hey, Node should implement or not implement X because it's good for that overall thing.
Right.
I just haven't seen anybody bring that back to the project to get project
Yeah.
consensus on anything, right? So it's a good place. I think that's the right place to have those discussions, and then, you know, interested people can bring them back to the Node project if there's something they think that Node should do to sort of participate. I think it's a Node's project problem to figure out how to make the rest of them successful, I guess, is the.
Oh yeah, no, I guess maybe I'm misinterpreting it. So maybe this is more goals for their working group as opposed to goals for Node. Yeah.
Yeah, well, yeah, and for the here, that's a good question. Like as a team within the Node project, I don't know.
I guess I express or, you know, see my ability to contribute to this group by, you know, being not only a maintainer but also a consumer, and, you know, obviously Node is the fulcrum of that relationship, you know. So part of me being a package author is like is getting ESM, is getting fetch, is getting all the web APIs, right? And
I agreed. Yeah, no, and that's a very good point. Yeah,
and that influences how I think now when I start a package. I'm like, do I really need that path import, or could I just split a string myself or use like a general purpose utility, right? And doesn't mean I'm still not going to be running Node for all my GitHub actions and all my, you know, but you know, I just, Node might just not work in an edge function, but every other part of the supply chain, it's amazing for, you know.
Yeah, no, I think from that perspective of saying, like, from package authors, what are the asks, right? Like that makes a lot of sense, right?
Now, you know, like you got your Svelte kits, your Vercels, like, you know, you know, just like you'd have like, you know, in theory, the premise of web codes be like, all right, just write that button once instead of like the one for every framework. And now it's almost still kind of feels weird because like every framework still needs its like wrapper function around that button. So yeah, I guess homogeny in the ecosystem is good. So I guess it's more of like anticipatory rather than like, you know, just keeping your pulse on the, or keeping your thumb on the pulse, I suppose.
There's definitely, you know, something like there's a conversation that actually Luke just, you know, submitted a problem statement on the Winter CG side that we're talking about is around functions, and like every functions framework has a different API, and it's like they do almost exactly the same thing. Why are they all just subtly different, right? So can we agree on
like the function signature and stuff like that? Yeah,
it's
like context,
function signature versus, how do you return what the function is? Like at the high level, it's a really simple, you know, I have a function with a couple parameters, you know, but somehow they're all different enough that, you know, you have to learn something new and they're going to look different. And so being able to write your code once and run everywhere is interesting, and I think that will. But it's sort of like in that perspective of like, you know, so wanting ESM for that reason to say, hey, I want to write ESM so it can run everywhere I want to deploy, and I want Node to do a decent job, or I want to support both. Like for me, makes sense, right?
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, I mean, I guess to me that's just where I kind of see the press. I guess, and maybe it's a little bit more or less Node, and maybe a little bit more around like NPM and stuff like that, or kind of that relationship, because you now start to see Dino and Bun adding support for NPM. And then I think the next hazard is is my package working because it's pure JavaScript or because there's a polyfill for some transitive dependency? And then when I do go to that edge function and it blows up, it took me all the way to deploy time. So
Right.
it's almost like, I wonder if there's like static and out, almost like Dino requires you to opt in to something like FS or whatever. Like, could you scan and be like, oh, hey, you didn't realize it, but there's an FS here, and maybe in local development, you're cool. But as soon as you get to the actual production runtime, all of a sudden that's, you know, going to pop off in your logs or something like that. So potentially there's a opportunity either for content or tooling that maybe, you know, maybe fits under the Winter CG umbrella instead, if it's like that right once run anywhere. But you know, I feel like you're probably going to still have lots of developers starting in Node and then wanting to branch out, and kind of just like as Jordan, you know, explained with the CJS ESM, you know, if you've been around long enough, maybe you already know, or if you're deliberately creating like an ESM based ecosystem. But short of those two, if you're just casually developing, it could be a lot more frustrating than and you don't really know why per se, right? Like you don't know this long history of modular systems, or this like the subtlety of, well, one can go one can be bi-directional, but the other can't unless you do this. And, you know, so it's like yeah, it's almost like, is this like this web API renaissance in backend kind of like about to set like a new high watermark that, you know, could power this like new generation of packages? And you know, instead of like the schism of like a Python 2.3, it's like, here's the new tide to lift all the boats or something. I don't know. It's probably getting above our pay grade here, but whatever.
Well, so I think I'm on the same wavelength as you maybe in terms of the ESM. Like it's enough people, regardless of what your own personal philosophy is, if you're delivering a module, you probably want to address that market, if you want to put it right. And
it's also the thing of like, as I've been iterating on my project and like upgrading to Node and getting access to fetch and request and responses, like to your point about the function signature, it's like I don't have to make up my own like middleware system. I can literally just say, you know, I'm going to give you a request, you give me a response, and I can link both of those to MDN and be like, everything is there. All the APIs are there. All the things you can do with it are there. And I don't know, I just, you know, maybe I'm late to the game, but I feel like that's a little bit profound in a way, or just makes the, you know, it's less docs I have to write. It's less things you have to learn that are bespoke to my like system, you know, are the language we share, not just in the spec, but like in the docs, you know, the gap closes even further. I mean, that's a lot of my philosophical reason behind ESM is like, it's just less of a potential for like a breakdown in communication, or like, oh, I forgot to document an edge case or something like that. You know, it's like, no, I support the stack. That's something we can all rally around, and it's foundational in, you know, in general, right? Like if you learn fetch, take that wherever you go, you know?
Yeah. That's sort of the same thoughts along like the function signature, right? Like,
yeah,
but
exactly.
It is a tension, right? Because like there's been lots of, you know, some other ecosystems like Java, very much we have a spec, we implement the spec, everybody, there can be competing things, but everybody implements the same spec. And there is value in
like the
terms
JVM,
of,
right?
Yeah,
Kotlin,
right. Like
Java, yeah.
Whether you run, you know, IBM's Java, Oracle's Java, there's two or three others.
Right.
You don't really have to learn something new, right? And even, on the web servers, right? There was J2EE, which would say, here's what your server looks like, here's your functions, all of them would implement them versus, I've got to learn Fastify Express, whatever, whatever, right? And I don't think JavaScript is ever going to go to the, hey, we have a spec for everything, but there's, like you just explained, there's value to having one thing you can understand versus having to learn several.
Right.
And it's finding the right balance between those, right? Is the
Yeah, I mean, like there is a drop off point, like once you start getting into like file system and whatnot, like obviously but in the server space, there's pretty well established patterns and concepts around like, request comes in, response goes out, that's pretty universal. And hence why the winter CG exists now,
Yeah.
I'm honestly, I've never been more excited for Node because of all this. And I couldn't wait to upgrade to 18. It's been, it's great. It's kind of like that thing where it's like, I don't have to focus on implementation. I can kind of focus on, like just using the thing easier, or, just less of my own prose I have to come up with, but I guess for the group, I guess it's just and that's kind of why I thought maybe like a survey would be like, are we in that like 1% of folks on the edge it's sometimes it's hard to you can't teach experience, right? That's the saying, and so kind of hence why I think our conversation was good and landing on like, well, just know we're trying to understand what people are trying to achieve, and then do the choose your own adventure thing based on that, right? But I have a feeling that it's probably only going to increase, and especially since all these meta frameworks are embracing it, the browser, the web, like a lot of them are really gonna, I think, flourish in this kind of winter CG era. And but it still could be very cryptic because a lot of these packages aren't never had the concept of like isomorphism, right? Now all the meta frameworks are basically dealing with the fallout of that. It's like, oh, my thing doesn't work, or this doesn't exist, or window, and all, like everybody's getting the window undefined now in like SSR mode, right? So everybody's gonna have their own trials and tribulations in some capacity, but I think it's for the greater good, in my opinion.
Sounds good. So so I guess in terms of goals, we're pretty much out of time. So I'll leave that one on the agenda and can pick that up. I'll just say we had some discussion. Let me continue with the rest of group. Yeah, so I mean, feel free to sort of put in proposals or stuff like that in there if you have like here's a goal or a concrete like outcome or something like that.
I'll brainstorm on this for a little bit for the next one.
Sounds good. Okay.
Awesome.
Yes, well, thanks, and we'll see you next time.
Yeah, good catching up. Happy New Year.
Yep. Happy New Year. Yep. Bye.